My name is Noah, and right now I'm fishing on a quiet levee. The secret to catching fish, I've learned, is patience, keeping a low profile and staying calm. As I watch the line drift and sway, my thoughts wander back to yesterday's scolding from my boss. I work in sales at a moving company, a job I got into after starting as a part-timer in high school. A few years later, I was transferred to a new department, where I found myself under the thumb of Susan, a boss whose temperament is as harsh as her expectations. Susan, in her 40s now, has a shrill, piercing voice that can break the calm of any room. Her words are always loaded with criticism, and yesterday was no exception. "You're the only one in the department who hasn't met this quarter's goals," she yelled. "You're dead weight here." Her voice rang in my ears. She never misses a chance to bring up my lack of a college degree. I didn't go to college. I joined the company right after high school. It's something I've always been at peace with, but for Susan, it's a weakness she can never let go. Ironically, Susan went to a vocational school for illustration. She used to dream of being an artist, but when that didn't pan out, she ended up in this industry, where she's now been for almost 20 years. At drinking parties, Susan often vents her frustrations. "I should have gone to university instead of that vocational school," she drunkenly laments. The bitterness in her words is palpable. It's clear she regrets her choices and holds that regret against me, someone with only a high school education. It's almost as if she needs to remind herself that the struggle is everyone's, not just hers. She makes it her mission to belittle me. I face her constant verbal abuse in silence, knowing no one will defend me. Susan is too well established in the department for anyone to speak out against her. The others turn their backs, casting cold glares at me as if to say I deserve this. Even when I'm fishing, it's hard to clear my mind of her harsh words. Fishing is one of the few things that keeps me grounded. The rhythm of the rod, the silence of the water. It helps me forget everything else. "Hey, Noah, your line's shaking," George calls out, snapping me from my thoughts. George is an experienced fisherman. He's the kind of guy who fishes even during long holidays. His skin is dark from constant sun exposure, and his smile is always warm. I shake my head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine," I say, trying not to bring my problems into his peaceful space. "You sure?" George laughs. "Looks like you're thinking about something big." I nod and refocus on the line, trying to let go of the gnawing thoughts of Susan, my job, and the deeper turmoil in my personal life. After a while, I feel a tug on the line. My heart skips a beat. I reel it in slowly, savoring the moment as I pull up a large fish. The cheers from George and our other fishing buddies echo in the air. "Nice catch. This one's a big one. Your family will be thrilled." George beams. I smile, but it feels forced. Even on days like this, when I catch something huge, the weight of my personal struggles pulls me down. I sigh inwardly as I think of my wife, Helen, and our daughter, Sarah. Helen's been acting strangely lately, distant, cold, almost like she's shutting me out. It all came to a head a few weeks ago when I saw Helen walking with another man on my way home from work. I stopped in my tracks, my heart sinking. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. It couldn't be true, could it? I didn't confront her then. I was too afraid, too paralyzed by the thought that she might be having an affair. But the uncertainty gnawed at me, growing worse with every passing day. I thought maybe showing Helen the fish I caught today would help, somehow bridge the gap between us. Maybe, just maybe, it could spark something. With that faint hope, I hurried home, the cooler filled with my catch. But when I opened the door, my heart sank further. Helen didn't even glance at the fish. Without a word, she handed me a piece of paper. My hands trembled as I read it. Divorce. "No way, you're kidding," I muttered, my voice a mere whisper of disbelief. Helen's face was impassive, her tone cold. "I'm tired of being with a man who's gloomy, boring, and smells like fish. I want to start over." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. Start over? With him, I asked, my voice cracking. Helen didn't flinch. It's your fault. You've always been incompetent. You never try to change. I tried to fight back, but my words failed me. I'd always been bad at arguing, especially when she was so good at tearing me down. She listed every flaw she saw in me. My salary, my failures, my inability to support her the way she needed. Despite my attempts to defend myself, I couldn't win. The words stung, but they didn't hurt as much as what came next. She turned away and left with Sarah, our daughter, without even a glance back. I stood frozen, unable to stop them. My heart shattered as I watched my daughter leave. The next weekend, I found myself at the breakwater where I always fish. The sky was turning an orange hue, the sea stretching out endlessly before me. They say the ocean makes your troubles feel small, but staring at it only made mine feel larger. I couldn't stop thinking about my family, my daughter. Would I ever see her again? Would I ever be able to live with her again? In the midst of the custody battle, the odds were stacked against me. Even though Helen was the one who cheated, mothers almost always get custody. I felt powerless. The thought that I might never get to live with Sarah again consumed me. Just as I was sinking into despair, George's voice broke through my thoughts. Noah, I thought you left. You okay? You look like you're about to jump in the sea. His words were simple, but they cut deep. It felt like he could see right through me. Without warning, the dam inside me broke. I poured out all the pain and frustration that had been building up for so long. I told him everything. The harassment at work, the infidelity, the divorce, the loss of my daughter. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to be vulnerable, hoping that somehow, just maybe, sharing my burden with George might lighten the load. I had been told I was worthless by both my job and my family. The weight of it all seemed unbearable, and for a moment, I wondered if I should just end it all and throw myself into the sea. Tears flowed freely, choking me with their intensity. I could barely speak through the sobs that racked my body. But George, steady and calm, looked at me, his eyes unwavering, and listened without interruption. He placed his hands on my shoulders, firm but comforting, and said in a quiet yet insistent tone, "Just being alive and able to fish, that's enough, isn't it?" His words, simple yet profound, wrapped around my heart like a balm. George's compassionate smile gave me a flicker of calm amidst the storm in my chest. "Noah, if you were gone, I'd lose my fishing mentor," he continued, a touch of humor in his voice. "That would be a real problem for me." I managed a weak laugh. "Mentor? I hardly ever catch big fish," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. "I fish more than anyone, and just the other day, I ended up catching a plastic bottle. Seriously, there's just too much plastic floating around these days. Maybe I should become an environmental activist." George laughed heartily, his joy infectious. I realized then that George had a rare charisma, a warmth that drew people in. His kindness was a beacon, and it was no wonder everyone around him adored him. "Thanks, George," I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "I'll try a bit harder." George nodded, a serious glint in his eyes. "Good to hear, Noah. But remember, sometimes you have to muster the courage to fight. Don't run away from it. Fight for what you want. And if you need help, I'll pick up the pieces for you." "Pick up the pieces?" I smiled softly. "Sounds like you're expecting me to die, George." We both chuckled, but his words struck a chord deep inside me. I had been running from conflict my whole life, avoiding confrontation, accepting whatever was thrown my way. But for the first time, George's words made me think. Was this really how it was supposed to be? Was I supposed to keep living in this passive way? I needed to confront my fears and take charge of my own life. The next day at work, Susan yelled at me again, her voice sharp and cutting. "Your shirt is wrinkled. Do you even care about your job? If you don't, just leave." Her voice was a constant barrage, an unrelenting source of frustration, and this time I had had enough. I remembered George's words. "Fight. I had a part in this too. I didn't have to take it anymore. If I didn't like the way I was being treated, I needed to speak up. I squared my shoulders and glared at Susan. So, it's okay if I leave then. Susan's face shifted instantly. She hadn't expected me to talk back, and I could see her floundering. Well, it's not a problem, she stammered, clearly caught off guard. With newfound resolve, I slammed the resignation letter I had prepared earlier onto her desk. Then please submit this to our president, I said, my voice steady. The office fell into an awkward silence. Colleagues stared wide-eyed, and I heard someone whisper, I can't believe Noah is snapping. Susan, flustered and shaken, took the letter without another word. Fine. If you insist, I'll take your resignation to the president right away, she muttered, her voice strained. As she stormed off, I felt a strange sense of closure. After so many years in this company, it was over. A part of me was sad. There were things I'd enjoyed about this job, but there was also relief. I had done something for myself. I gathered my things, ready to head to my usual fishing spot. As I thought about George's words, I'll pick up the pieces for you, I felt a sense of peace. At least I wasn't alone in this. But just as I was about to leave, the phone on my desk rang. My heart skipped a beat. It could be about the resignation. I picked up the receiver, trying to steady my nerves. Please come to the president's office immediately, the voice on the other end instructed. Confused, I left my desk and made my way to the president's office. Inside, Mr. Thompson, the president, sat with Susan, who looked visibly uncomfortable. To my surprise, Susan was the first to speak. I'm sorry, Noah. I went too far. Please, reconsider your resignation. I was stunned. I had no idea what was going on, but Mr. Thompson quickly explained. Noah, you've been handling our major client, Bridgewater Commercial. But recently, Susan took over the account due to low sales. Mr. Thompson began. I nodded. Yes, I was in charge of Bridgewater Commercial until last week. I always believed in nurturing long-term relationships with our clients. But due to low sales, Susan took over the account. Here's the issue, Mr. Thompson continued. Mr. Bridgewater, the president of Bridgewater Commercial, has expressed that if you're not involved, they may reconsider their business with us. I blinked, shocked. Mr. Bridgewater said that? Yes. When Susan brought in your resignation, Mr. Bridgewater personally complained. I ordered her to convince you to stay. I suddenly understood the situation. This wasn't just about me. It was about the future of the company. And yet, this revelation only made my heart grow heavier with the knowledge that Susan's behavior had been allowed to continue for so long. I turned to Susan, anger rising within me. Susan, this isn't just about Bridgewater. This is about how you've treated me. Mr. Thompson looked at her sharply. What do you mean, Noah? I took a deep breath. I've been enduring daily harassment from Susan. Her treatment of me is unacceptable. If she stays, I will still leave. Susan stammered, taken aback. Mr. Thompson's face hardened as he turned to her. Susan, is this true? She looked down, defeated. Workplace harassment is a serious matter in today's world, Mr. Thompson said gravely. We will thoroughly review this. A few days later, the company conducted an internal inquiry, confirming the harassment. Susan was demoted and transferred. It was a swift decision, made in the wake of Bridgewater Commercial's threat to take their business elsewhere. As for me, I was reinstated and put back in charge of Bridgewater Commercial. That weekend, I went fishing with George, eager to share the news. You did it, George exclaimed when I told him. You fought back. No, I corrected. It was your advice that helped me. I'm just glad to be back handling the Bridgewater account. That's great, Noah, George said, smiling. I'm glad to be working with you again. Actually, I chuckled. The president of Bridgewater Commercial is none other than George Bridgewater himself. George laughed, waving his hand dismissively. Hey, dropped the Mr. Bridgewater when we're off the clock. I realized that my success in business, and even in life, was due in no small part to the time I spent with George. He had helped me more than I could ever repay. I bowed my head gratefully. Thank you, George. I can't thank you enough. George smiled. The fight isn't over yet, though, is it? No, I replied. There's still the custody battle for Sarah. Once you win, bring her here again, George said, with a smile that spoke volumes. 6 months later, after countless challenges and battles, I found myself standing in front of George again, this time with Sarah by my side. We had won. Thanks to the lawyer George referred me to, the court had ruled in my favor. Sarah would be living with me. I watched as George cast his line into the water. He looked over at me, his face full of satisfaction. The battle's finally over, Noah. I nodded. Yes, it is. As I sat beside him, I realized that the battles I'd faced, the ones in the office with my family, had been about more than just surviving. They had been about standing up, about fighting for what mattered. I wasn't the man I used to be, and I knew that with George's unwavering support, I could continue to face whatever life threw my way. Suddenly, George's fishing line tugged violently. "Oh, here comes a big one," he shouted, excitement in his voice. "Careful, George. Take it slow," I said, ready to help. With both of us working together, George reeled in the biggest catch of the day. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally living on my own terms.